Hi guys, I'm Jen. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be about emotions. And so uh, as a child, I was always considered a sensitive child, and because it was very easy to make me cry, I guess. And looking back and understanding now what I experienced as a child, where I was the emotional punching bag, the one, the runt of the family, the one that people go you know, to dump their frustrations on, but then also require me to be the comfort. I now see like having to um, take on everyone's emotions, but at the same time, in my household, we were not allowed to show our emotions. Dad was, but we were not. We were not allowed to. Our emotions made him very uncomfortable. Partly, I think, because he's under a lot of stress, but I think it also made him feel like a failure at times. Like when your kids are upset, it makes them feel something personal about themselves, like they're not doing something correctly. But I mean, children and people feel pain, and we struggle, and we have challenges. That's just life. But as a child, when like I didn't have people checking in with me, asking, am I okay? How are you feeling about this? Like there was never a lot of communication outside of like daily tasks, like go make your bed, go, it's breakfast, it's time for school. Like a lot outside of that, there wasn't a lot of communication, like interaction. Uh, in our household, it was more like being seen and not heard. And we grew up in a religious environment, so like there's a lot of obedience required and falling in line, and not the squeaky wheel gets the oil was not something, because the squeaky wheel gets the target of the emotional hurricane. That's what you get. So we try to avoid the attention of our father because he was so unhinged emotionally. And so when I realized I was carrying all these emotions from childhood because I had suppressed them, because I wasn't allowed to express them, I wasn't taught either. We were taught to make things look good, on the outside. And so I can imagine, unless you lived right next door to us and you could hear Dad yelling, like aside from that, a lot of people probably considered our household a normal, healthy household, that maybe we were struggling financially because there are 3 kids there and we were a blue collar family. But after there's certain people I've met in life where I was able to see the other side that my dad showed other people. And then it also brought up memories of like being at the grocery store, and he was the friendliest person, over chatty to everybody else, but at home, like he ignored us. On the way home, driving, when we were old enough to start our own jobs and stuff, and we would all carpool. I remember my dad would tell Mom all about his day, but then I remember watching her when she would try to express her day or her frustrations or whatever was happening at work, like he was silent, and it's like she wasn't even talking. I remember that. That's who he didn't care. He wouldn't pick up food for her. He would pick up food for him. He didn't care if she ate, even though she was one, for the most part, cooking all the food. He would wake up on a Saturday sometimes and cook crepes, and we all love that. But it's also, he played the good guy in that way, where it's like he's serving the crepes and the sugar, and it's like, and he would bring home pastries, but Mom was the one who was required to make the real food and get us to eat the real food and sit there and make sure we did. He would send in a random, like, fist, eat your supper, and like intimidation sort of tactic. But and so growing up in a household where you're not allowed to express your emotions, you carry that through with you through your adult life. And just the upbringing of like, my emotions don't matter, or I don't matter. And not only, the other aspect of this is like, I grew up thinking I had to fix things, like I had to fix other people. I had to focus on other people. And I do believe that was not just in our household, but I also believe it's from being involved in religion, and that sort of like always forgiving, and there's no accountability. Like there was no accountability that we were taught in church. It was like we had to behave and obey, but that was as children. There's no talk about adults. And like, so it got to a point, I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. I did find it challenging to live on my own. I did find it challenging to make friends. And when I was younger, in my 20s, I was approached by older men that were in their 30s trying to get sexually involved with me and date me. You know, it's really odd looking back, like how predatory men are, and especially when I was 18 and 19. And I just remember, like, that's when I was getting into drinking and things like that. And even around other people, like I was hanging out with older people, and even the women there were encouraging me to like get connected with some of these quite older men. And I think it's because they did the same thing and they thought, like, that's, you know, if we're doing it, she should do it. And it's such an odd, like, you normally you would want better for your people that are following you. Like for the younger women, when I put this out here is so that they can learn from our mistakes and hopefully do better. But that's not those aren't the women I was around. I was around a lot of women who are not happy in their situations. And it's interesting because they saw, like, I feel like they saw me as a threat, but I didn't want their men. Like their men aren't, you know, it wasn't like a catch in my eyes. But it does, what I can see is like, a lot of these older men looking for younger women, you know, they prey on them because they're looking for attention. They're looking for attention and love in all the wrong places. And these men are willing to pick that up. And it's actually gross when you look at it. It is really gross when you recognize it like that. And so at the age of 23, I got pregnant just with, you know, having sex with a casual man who, you know, I thought it felt like that's just what I was supposed to do. That's what I saw. Like, remember, I had not had any conversations about sex, about relationships, about what to look for in a man. I didn't have any guidance growing up from my parents. I had rules. You know, in the house, we do this. You know, we don't do this outside because it's embarrassing to the family. Like, not in so many words, but like, there's expectations to have for how to behave, but it was more based on to create this sort of view of our family, right? It wasn't because we behave like this because this is integrity, this is morals and their values. Like that was like the facade of things, like that's the right thing to do. But it wasn't, it was very controlled and rules for no reason. That's why I don't enjoy religion, because there's a lot of rules for no reason. And so when I'm 23, I get pregnant, and now I have my son, and then shortly after I have my daughter. So they're less than a year apart. And to be honest, I did want twins. I am a twin. It didn't work out well for me, but the idea of it, what I did like is having a sibling that was close in age, that you always had like a little buddy to hang out with. Later in life, I realized it was actually my connection with my sister actually was really toxic, unfortunately, and competitive. And I do blame part of that on my father as well, because like I do feel like he played the kids against each other, unfortunately, you know. And I don't know if all of that was intentional. I understand like he was tired from work, but so was my mom, and she was tired from work, and there just was no nurturing given in that household. It was focused on food and shelter and clothing, and outside of that, like that was not considered a necessity or need, right? And so it was a very stress-filled house, and a lot of like impulsive actions, a lot of like emotional reactions. There's a lack mentality in that house, and a lack of self-worth, and that's what trickled down to us, unfortunately. And this is something I've been working on myself. It's like I had a real challenge, because when I started working on myself and healing myself, I could start recognizing what I had experienced in other people's. And then I worked on it and really managed it really well. So now I want to help other people. But I recognize there's a lot of people out there that don't want to work on themselves. And there are people that do. I'm a self-teacher. I self-taught myself. I only had 3 therapists in my life, and 2 of them I found were more damaging than helpful, in my opinion. And what I mean by that is they send you down, you know, the wrong road where you have to come back from that. Instead of, it's kind of like in that movie in the Labyrinth, where that little guy, that little worm seems really helpful, and he's like, oh, you don't go down that way. That would have been the way to the exit. That would have taken you there right away. And that's where I kind of feel like the people in my life that I looked up to, that were guiding me all through my first half of life there, were really misguiding. And it's interesting because I've started to see where a lot of people don't know what they're talking about. And I used to assume people had, you know, bigger houses, more money, more friends, that made them like more successful in life. And it didn't. It made them more fake and codependent on other people. Not in all cases, but in what I've been experiencing, a lot of these people who are overly confident really don't know shit what they're talking about. And so when I was struggling with the kid's dad at 24 with my young kids, that's when the stressors, like I had a puppy when I was younger and I passed it off on my mom when I met a man, an older man, of course, right? And that guy was not great. I have not been with a great man. Like, honestly, I haven't even been with a good man throughout all my life. I just have not, I don't know what that, I don't, it's like a unicorn. Like, I can't say that I've met a man that I know is a good man. Like, you know, you meet people in passing and you're like, well, you seem really nice and you seem really kind. You seem to have a good understanding, but I still don't know like what the motive is behind, because you understand even people on YouTube that are that speak and seem to know what they're talking about, like they're still on camera, and like what do they do behind closed doors? I need to see how someone carries himself in real life, not when just the camera's on or when people are watching. And so I just haven't had that chance to do that and meet someone who I would want to spend time with in my life and include in my circle. And so growing up, and when I started getting more responsibilities of trying to raise my children and then trying to work with the kid's father, who was very much exactly like my father. He was very, is it tumultuous, like reactive. He was very intimidating. He liked to be unpredictable. He liked playing poker because it was unpredictable and he liked that. Um, but I mean, he's very predictable. He's a deadbeat dad. Like when shit gets real, when you have to get him to be accountable, he's gone every time, every single time. That's not unpredictable. So it's interesting how like they would put themselves in this higher position of like putting themselves on a predator of like, I'm this type of person. You're like, but are you? Like, and so the longer I parented with the kid's dad, the more I realized he was never going to help out. It wasn't about him maturing and growing. It was is an intention. He had no intention of, like when we used to set up, at some point we used to try to set up, like, because I was struggling with doing all the housework and a lot of the outside work, because he just didn't do any. He was a gamer. He played video games and watched porn. He didn't, he was a very young, immature person, and that's who he was when I met him. And I think part of the church also tries to teach you about hope in another person. I don't know if that's exactly where I got that message, but I used to hope that they would change. Hope without any sort of intention or like movement or action is just humiliation. Like anytime I hoped he would do different, he never did. And I'd be let down, I'd be deflated. And that emotion was using up energy that I didn't have. And I was very tolerant and resilient as I was younger, but as I got older and I got pressed more and more, that's when I was being pressed to express the emotions that I'd been carrying in life. I didn't know that I was carrying all this pain around. I didn't know that. I'm just like, why does things keep happening to me? Why is life happening like this? What is going on here? And it got to such a point where I finally decided, like, there's a couple times that we would leave and get back together. So one time he left and then he would come back in. And then another time I invited him back because the kids were living with him and I was scared because, like, he has a temper. He doesn't take care of the kids and he's very much like my father. Like, he doesn't understand, like, how to feed and nurture and take care of kids. You know, he doesn't. Like, and he gave my 11-year-old son, when they have, like, they have alcoholism in their family. So he decided to give my son beer at the age of 11 was a good idea. And his brother was there too and didn't stop it. So the family was just the same, you know? They're his yes man. They wouldn't stand up to him even when a child is being fed beer. Like that's their discernment. That's their judgment calls. And even with his family being involved, like they his mom pretended to be understand, like, oh well, yeah, he's kind of like that, but behind my back, like she was saying the same things about me, like I was a problem, my expectations, like they would pay for him to move, for his new furniture, like they were investing in him, and I never got one dime from those. When I was struggling, when their kid was being a deadbeat dad, Like, they never sent me groceries. They never offered to take the kids. I think they took them one time where they were like, you know, can you come pick up the kids and meet us halfway because there's a restaurant we want to eat at and it's going to close soon. Like, that was their idea of help. And they liked helping when the kids were young because his parents, his mom was getting supply from the younger kids, you know. These people don't fall far from the tree, and they require, like, they need to be seen in a certain light, and that's their supply. And so when I realized, you know, I was really getting pushed from every angle, from my family, from his family, from him, from coworkers, from potential friends, like friends that were considered my friends. I was just depleted because, like, I had friends too at the time, and I had siblings like who would just sit on the phone and bitch about their life, and then like it was like clockwork, whereas like that's all they do is bitch, and they never did anything different. And I'm sitting here living by myself, you know, because they're bitching about their partners or they're bitching about the men they're involved with. But their kids are suffering and struggling, and they're so focused on like their struggle in life, they're not realizing like your kids are being brought along your trauma. And I had already at this time made choices to leave the kids' dad. Like I said, it is 2 or 3 times we ended up like getting back together and leaving. And I did that because I felt like it'd be safer. Like I couldn't have my kids living with him. He was he was not safe. He's very unstable, and he was abusive. And so he was financially abusive as well because he stopped paying child support. He got fired from his job when I bought my single home for me and my kids. When it was in London, he got fired from his job from drinking. So that was a choice he made. And yeah, so it got to a point where I met another man. He was a coworker, and I actually don't remember seeing him at work. I met him online on the online dating, and he had 2 boys. They were obsessed with hockey for the one boy, like to the point where it just like the other little boy just got dragged everywhere for this guy's hockey career. And it was with him that I really got pissed off with like I was receiving so little. This man was playing me. He was flirting with all these other women. He was constantly like propositioning other women. Like, he was always trying to fill his Facebook page with single attractive women. And it was to triangulate me and make me feel jealous, but it was also to have other, like, he couldn't be by himself. He was so codependent on women's attention, where and then I mean, I guess on dudes' attention too, because he was one of those guys who would brag and to other people, and he kept pictures of me that were inappropriate to keep, especially after you break up with somebody. And so I can only imagine, like, why would you keep those? So he'd probably show those to other people, you know, his friends. And just very immature energy, but he was different because he was more charming. And so I didn't see it coming. That was my blind spot, because I knew what angry and hostile and disruptive and unpredictable looked like. I grew up with that. I didn't grow up with the charming side of things. And that's where I feel like that was the other side of my dad, that he offered everybody outside of his family, like that facade, that friendly, charming, ho, I'm just a dad out here. You know, I'm just trying my best to, you know, they don't appreciate me. I work my butt off. And, you know, like that kind of dad. That's who he was. And that's who this other guy was. And so it got to a point where I couldn't stop the emotions from coming at this point. Before, I couldn't, you know, work through them. But this time I was just like, okay, now now I've unplugged, like, because I've started to get aware that where the emotions were coming from, if that makes sense. Like, before, I didn't know. Like, this is where I'm starting to step into spirituality when I was dating this Todd guy. And it was interesting because this is when I fell into spirituality, and more of like that, you know, get into your feelings. You're allowed to feel. It's like I was being given permission to go into my feelings. Whereas before, I didn't think that was an option. I didn't think that was a door I could open. And so now, not only am I being pressed and I'm being guided in a way of spirituality where it's like, let's get in touch with these emotions. Let's find out what's going on. I'm starting to express them. But then I'm also starting to realize how I've been controlled by emotions, by jealousy, by guilt, by shame. You know, people trying to make me feel small. People, like, when I'm trying to grow and get big, you get that sort of like passive aggressive, like I remember sitting at a table with the kid's dad and their family eating at a festive dinner, and he had one bite left and I had a couple bites and I needed a knife, but to try to get around to the other side it would have been much harder. And so I assumed he was done because he had one bite left. He's got a big mouth. So one bite, but as soon as I went to assume that and grab his knife, he like grabbed my wrist, and he's like, he was aggressive about it. And even like his brother-in-law was like, whoa, and he laughed out of nervousness, but he didn't say anything, of course. And I was just so embarrassed, trying not to cry, because he just humiliated me. Like you can't take my knife, you didn't ask. But it's like, dude, like I can literally see from my eyes that you haven't used it this whole time, let's be honest, but you didn't need it for the last bite. But he didn't like that I made an assumption to take something off his plate. Like that's what people do, that's what couples do. It's so weird. And that's what I grew up with. That sort of unpredictability, that crazy, like, that is so cruel. It's cruel. It's really cruel behavior. And that's what I grew up with. That's what my mom grew up with. That's what my siblings grew up with. But they went the other way, where they didn't want to acknowledge that that's how we grew up, because I know that they also had a lot of like caring what people think. And I have that too, but not to the point where like I got pressed, I think, because they still had their partners to raise their kids with. They still had comfort in their life. I had chosen a path of discomfort and struggle, to parent the kids by myself, to walk away from my past and my patterns and try to do better. And so when I did that, I really got a lot of kickback from the people who were partnered up around me, who had chosen to settle with a life that was not kind or is more comfortable, right? And so as I started expressing my emotions, I did an inner child healing that was really helpful. And I would do it differently now, because in that inner child, I was meant to see my parents as, like, I meant to picture myself as a 4-year-old child and give me what I needed at that time. But I also had to see my parents as a 4-year-old child. And while I think that's valuable and helpful, I had to push past that, because as long as I was still seeing them as the victim of their parents, there is no accountability for that, right? So that's where I started to see spirituality was actually quite damaging and well, because it requires you to forgive these people who are still damaging and not willing to acknowledge how they've hurt you. Like they'll give you like some sort of soft apologies, but it really is just to keep you in their life, and it's really just to keep taking from you what they're unwilling to give to themselves, and it's like they're still staying with those toxic partners, and that's going to bleed on you. And it did, because I felt responsible for my parents, because they continued to make these bad choices. They weren't healthy. They didn't watch what they ate. They didn't exercise. Like their idea of exercise was jumping on a trampoline. Well, that's great, but it's a small piece of the puzzle. You can't be around toxic people and be healthy. And so I felt like I was constantly begging these people to behave in a way where they would stop hurting me, because like I can't be attached to that, because they're requiring me to carry the emotional load here, and be the grown-up in the room. And I grew up being a grown-up in the room, carrying all these burdens, and it got to a point where I was no longer willing to do that for them. And it was a tough decision, because you get targeted, you get made to be the problem. My family considered me talking about our family issues to be a problem, and like a betrayal of the family. But like I'm literally being abused behind closed doors, emotionally and mentally, and then also financially, because in our household, dad got all the money and mom had to make do with very little to try to clothe the kids, while he's walking around in suits, and he's got all the CD collections in his basement, and he's got computers he doesn't really need all this stuff for. It's entertainment. It's not need and necessity, you know? He had hobbies. He got to go bowling, and he would take my siblings bowling. But if we want to do something we want, like it had to align with his interests, And when he talked to us, he would talk to us if he found it was academic or if we were joining a club. But that's because it for him, that added status, right? But when it was about our feelings and how we're feeling in life, like those conversations never happened. He didn't care about us internally. It was what we could offer externally as an image for him. And when you start to go in and pull that shit out, the painful truths, and really address like why you're connected with these people that you call family, there's a lot of grieving that happens. And so when I talk about emotions, there's a number of emotions that I've experienced. Now, because I've experienced it on so many levels and so many times, I've been able to slow this down. And for me, I found it helpful to find out where the tears are coming from. So there are tears that happen out of nowhere, and it's just like it's uncontrollable. And those are past grievances of situations that you weren't given time to grieve. You weren't given permission to grieve. And so that's when you hear something and it strikes you and the tears just come out of nowhere. That is like that. Those are past grievances. Those are like, I didn't know I was holding on to that, and now I'm releasing it. Now there's also a frustration, grieving, and an emotional reaction where it's like betrayal energy, or something's happened and it's going to set you back. And to me, I associate where I'm frustrated with the situation. I'm frustrated that this is happening to me at this time. That's from feeling like I need to be more than I am right now. I don't feel enough in the situation. I don't feel like I have enough time. I don't feel like I have enough resources. And that's a frustration, and that comes from impatience and thinking like I need to be someone I'm not. And so whenever I have that frustration, it's usually like when I am trying to get to a place and I have too much on my plate, and you say I'm going to cut the grass, I've already left it too long because I'm depressed and I'm feeling like I'd rather rest than work, but I know if I don't cut the lawn, it's not going to cut itself. And so when I go to do that, it gets, clogged up underneath, and then I go to turn the lawnmower over, and I realize as I've done that, I've just poured fuel all into the air filter. And so when I go to start the lawnmower again, because I've left it too long, the grass is sticking underneath the bottom, and now I've just tilt the lawnmower over and wreck the filter. Now the lawnmower won't start. So now I'm even more frustrated, because before I already felt behind in the situation, and so now I have to figure out this, and so I get frustrated. And there are times where I'll sit in that frustration and I would just say, fuck it. I'm not doing the lawn then. I'm not doing the lawn. If you don't want me to do the lawn, spirit, then I'm not doing the lawn. And that's kind of where I was at in spirituality. It's like, if spirit doesn't want this to work, then it's not going to work. And I had to get past that. It was like a growing stage of like getting past the frustration, acknowledging like I can do this, giving myself patience and time to learn and understand, like, you know what, I'm going to always be using a lawnmower. It makes sense to learn these things about the lawnmower. And what I grew up with was being thrown into situations with a lack of information, expecting myself to flourish and be successful, when in reality, like, nobody was guiding me or teaching me along the way. I was being thrown into life without a mentor, without a healthy, reliable, successful mentor. And I remember watching this video of a surfer. And so this kid is surfing, and this other guy comes out of nowhere, and I didn't realize at the moment I was watching, but he goes and he helps to physically get the child surfer to stand up on the board while they're on the wave. I don't know if that's all the terms. I don't know much about surfing. And just watching how it was such a quiet, standing behind the scenes kind of movement, so that child could feel the movement. I'm getting from a laying down position to standing up, with a little bit of support to balance that child in that movement, so that, oh, this is what it feels like. This is how I do it. That was an emotional video for me to watch, because I've never received that. What I did receive in childhood was emotional backlash. Whenever I was successful, my parent didn't like it. It made them feel some sort of way, because it was something that they weren't able to do. Whereas I was able to do it easily. So like what I got is, when I stood up, metaphorically in life, I got pushed back down by my siblings, by my parents, by envious people, and it's just like, I can't believe I even stood up. Like, the environment that I was raised in was so suppressed. Is that the right word? Suppressive? Oppressive? To the point where I was discouraged instead of encouraged. And like, when I didn't get something, it's almost like it was taken. When I did achieve something, it's like, that's where dad steps in, and oh, well, I used to do this in my day, so that's probably where she gets it. Like, it was taken away from me. The credit was taken away from me. And I got tons of ribbons at school for track and field. I was really fast. and then really athletic. And like that was good, but like my dad didn't support sports, you know? So that wasn't important to him. Sports and physical activity wasn't, he didn't consider that valuable. Like my brother played hockey, and my dad didn't really see that as a value. Like it's not like I don't ever remember seeing my dad out there playing hockey with my brother, you know? He did biking, but that's because dad liked biking, you know? And he liked baseball. He played baseball. He might play catch randomly, but then like that was very random. And it's like baseball was dad's sport. But what about the sport that we liked? You know, he played bowling, but that's because he liked bowling. Like I just don't ever remember him support, like, so we would do crafts. We were really crafty kids, and he would take us to museums because he wanted us to be, you know, educated and well run. And well, I love that. That's not a bad thing. It's for all the wrong reasons. It's like it's almost like, you know, let's do take, I know my kids are creative, let's go take them out here and they're going to show up, you know, other kids, and like they do really well in that. So it's almost, it just felt always for the wrong reason. Like with us, be with us, don't like do the craft with us. Stop using these opportunities to like talk to other people and network. That's what it always felt like whenever we were going out somewhere, it was like for image or for networking. You know, it was never about interaction with your kid. And he missed so many opportunities to connect with us. And really, and I saw, it was interesting because I allowed him to be around my grandkids at some point, and just to see how he could use them as like company, and so he wouldn't have to take these trips by himself. And it was like a, yeah, it was just unfortunate. Like I can see the benefit. And like he sent me a an album when I, like a while back, you know, hoping it would bring up some emotion and nostalgia, and that's exactly what grossed me out right there. Like he wants me to forget about all the abusive behavior and remember the good times, you know, and fall back into my emotion, because when I'm in my emotion, I'm controllable. Oh, I feel, oh yeah, remember those good times? Oh yeah. And then we reconnect. But there's no reconnection from, like, there's no apology. There's no change in behavior. He doesn't acknowledge he's an abusive person, you know, that he's hostile, that he's discouraging, that he's suppressing us. He's not encouraging. He didn't do it in the right way. And he doesn't want to hear that, though. He's not open to a conversation. He doesn't want to hear how he fucked up. He just wants to hear about how great of a dad he is. And unfortunately, I can't speak on that. I can speak on some moments where I'm like, these could have been great, but because they were partnered up with the abuse, it really took away that memory, that good feeling, because it was done for the wrong reasons. And so frustration is from having to learn things as an adult that I was meant to be taught as a child through kind, nurturing, patient guidance, and you know, offered wisdom, not criticism in a way that makes me not want to even do it anymore. Like like it's almost like his frustration bled onto me, because it's like he would get frustrated, but he didn't know, he wasn't teaching us. He just demanded us to do something. But it's like, do you know how to do this yourself? Because if you knew how to do it yourself, he'd be teaching us instead of telling us. You know, so he expected things out of us that he couldn't do himself. And maybe that's because he wasn't taught either, but that doesn't mean you don't learn. You know, there's things I'm having to learn from my kids. And I realized, like, while I had an emotionally abusive father, that if I continue to remain in line with these abusive people, then I would constantly be purging emotions. And it made me emotionally sensitive to the point where now this is now bleeding onto my kids, just for a different way and reason, right? So just because I have better intentions and I'm not trying to control my kids, and I had to be aware, because there are instances where I was trying to control my kids through emotional manipulation, and they called me out on it. I'm like, I didn't realize I was really doing that. And yeah, that is true. And so like that's the hard part too, is not only like you have to self-teach yourself later in life while you're also trying to support your own kids and work a job and, you know, survive society, but like you got to go back and redo, like, and like you've built your whole life structure on these outdated and unhelpful belief systems from somebody else. And now I have to do it as an adult. And then the thing is, while you're doing this as an adult, you're also a target for the large number of people around you that were quite comfortable staying in this bubble of delusion and abuse, because it worked for them. And I'd see a lot of comments of like when you watch gentle parenting, or like different ways of disciplining your kid. And when, you watch these videos and like, good job, you taught that child. Well, you taught that child to fear you now. That's not parenting. And like, you'll see like, that's what I did with my kid and it worked. Did it work parenting your kids out of fear? They don't respect you, they fear you. That's not someone who's going to want to spend time with you. And the only reason why they're spending time with you is out of fear, not because of they feel close, So it's like a disconnected connection. And so I started recognizing when I started having to teach myself and try to create a life that was different from what I'd seen growing up. And it was really challenging, and it is challenging because like I had to learn patience for myself. And like I'm a parent at this time too. And so it was really challenging because I realized I wasn't as patient as I thought I was. And I was easily disrupted, if that makes sense, because it was reactive abuse that I was also experiencing from everyone around me. Like the men I was involved with, took what they wanted and were not financially supportive, were not emotionally supportive. They were users and abusers. And the people I was around were the same way. And my family was like that. They're users and abusers, and they're opportunists. And unfortunately, like when you realize that is the group of people you're around and the group of people that you're drawn to and attracted to, that makes for a very lonely lifestyle while you're trying to now grow yourself into the human that you can be and you deserve to be, but you've been told all your life that you are not. And so it's a very challenging, it's a very emotional period. And so I learned like, I experienced a lot of depression during this time, and I didn't know what that was. I just felt like I thought at first, like I just don't have any energy to do anything. And that is part of it. I was burnt out from like managing all these other people and their lifestyles. And like my house was literally falling apart. My kids were going without. Oh, that makes me emotional. And the gross part is these people still come back to try to get back into your life, and they've done nothing different. They really have just tried to appear different, but they haven't done anything different. And when you try to tell them like what the damage you did to my kids, it's like they just don't care. They don't care. They don't even care about their own kids. They're relying on their own kids. They parentified their own children. They use their own children as measures of success, right? For all the wrong pointers or markers, like, well, my kid does great in school. Well, great. What does that mean? I mean, that's wonderful, but what is it? Are they a kind person? Is your person kind? Is he a bully? Do they expect everyone to revolve the world around them? Like, I don't give a shit what you get in school. How do they treat other people? How do they behave when they don't get their way? How do they behave when the spotlight is meant to be on other people? Because that's what I had to, is growing up with siblings who had children, where it was required for my kids to revolve themselves around those children. And it was designed and set up like that, to where it was made to make my kids feel less because they would spoil their kids. So it made them feel like they were bigger and more. It was by design. It's actually gross when you see it. And so the depression for me was attached to like nostalgia. And when I was by myself, and I knew I couldn't be around those people anymore, but being by myself, that took a whole new toll, because like, I'm like, I know I can't go back to those relationships because I know they're abusive in their behavior. And every time around them, like I either act like this, but I'm not allowed to be independent. I'm not allowed to speak my truth. I'm not allowed to be myself around these individuals. I'm required to abandon my truth and who I am in order to connect with them and not be abused. And I'm still being abused, even when I'm people pleasing, even when I'm fawning. I'm still being abused. I'm still suppressing those emotions, and that takes a toll on you too. That's draining. So all these things, like their emotional burden and baggage that I'm carrying, the suppressing of self, feeling like I have to walk around with a protective armor because I don't trust these people, because I've now seen their true colors and I'm learning who they really are and what their true intentions are. That is damaging that is hard to that true color, that painful truth, that takes a toll. And so you have to grieve that, and who you thought they really were. And when you start speaking up for yourself, not softly, but like very on point. This is like not saying, oh, I feel like you treat me like this. No, you treat me like this and I don't like it and you can't do it anymore. That's what speaking your truth is. I notice you treat me like this. And don't let them try to, well, no, we just did that because you were stressed out and you're behaving that way. No, I was not. When you get so good with recognizing patterns in yourself and other people, then you get to know yourself, and you no longer accept their bullshit on why they're treating you badly. And so when I went hermit mode and I had distanced myself from all these individuals, like when I would come up for Christmas, that was sad, because it was just me and my kids, and it went from like large numbers to like small, and like now there's no gifts, now there's no things I associate with Christmas. And at the time as well, my health was struggling, so like I had to remove the sugar, you know, the crazy amounts of sugar and junk food we eat at Christmas, and it didn't feel like my Christmas anymore. But what I had to realize was the Christmas I was nostalgic for was toxic. You know, those sugar treats, they were suppressing, they're like in place of the sadness that I was feeling, you know? Because at Christmas, whenever I had Christmas with these people, they weren't talking to me, they were talking at me. You know, my kids were just another form of supply for them to tell their stories to get attention, to make them feel bigger than they were, to make their kids feel better than they were. And it was really something to witness. And when you realize like Christmas wasn't really what it was, that's sad, and I had to grieve that. And that's what my depression was offloading all these things that I wasn't aware that I was taking on, and the ideas where I thought that it wasn't that bad, but it's that bad. It's that bad. It's that bad. And I also got a position at a workplace for 2 years in Frudenberg Knock, and that really showed me the true characters of my siblings and my family members, because I got to see the friendly face, you know, where it showed up as my siblings, but then I got to show when I started saying no, I got to see behind the scenes how these people are really behaving, and that was eye-opening as well. I learned a lot in that environment, and friendly faces are sometimes the most dangerous ones for me, because they're fake as fuck, you know. And like when you realize like these people, like there's a difference of somebody talking to you about like dumping on you and acknowledging that they have work to do. There's two very different, like, because I used to mistake that. I used to mistake like, oh, you know, they're acknowledging that their life is hard and struggling, so they're not trying to appear like their life is perfect. Because I had a lot of people who would appear like their life was perfect, and so I was the problem if I'm having issues with them, right? And it's like, well, no, you're treating me badly. Well, their life is perfect, so how could they be treating me badly? It must be me. And the problem is always me when I was bringing up these problems. And so in a workplace, I finally got to the point, because I spent so much time on my own, on like getting all this stuff out, where I'm just like, I work so much on myself now, I could recognize it in other people. And it was showing up, and I was like, oh, that person doesn't love themselves, or that person. And so for me, silly me, thought I could offer like, hey, I noticed like this is, you know, you put yourself down, you gossip about other people, like ever consider like, you know, maybe giving yourself some love and attention and focusing on that kind of stuff. And that is not what they wanted to hear. That's not, you'd think like that was a kind approach, but they still hear it as rejection, right? Because they see themselves on a pedestal, they put themselves up there. Because that's where they feel safe. They don't feel safe like saying, oh, I might not be perfect, I might be the problem. And so I got to see the other side of the coin to these people when I was to their face, and then to the other side about how they're actually reacting. Because you'll get a lot of like calm, you can get like where narcissists can be very calm, but they can also be very reactive, right? But the calm, they use the calm to try to be condescending and try to appear overly confident. So that's the confusing part, because you're getting so worked up because you're seeing that they are treating you badly, but they'll bring in the calm facade to be like holier than thou, and to try to make you appear to be the crazy one, when you're just like, well, this situation is crazy that you expect me to put up with this, to clean up your emotional mess. That's what's crazy, because that's what it always was. It was like, whether they were like calling me up to bitch about whatever, like they're angry, and they needed me to back their, like, it wasn't like they were looking for like a they're looking for a yes man. They weren't looking for, they were never looking. And while I understand that sometimes we go through things and we have to like vent that out, I get that part. That's not what this was. They required me to be a yes man. And it's interesting because they were always the one to point out what they thought I was doing wrong, and how when I when I bought a house instead of a townhouse, and when I had to leave and sell those houses because I couldn't financially afford them, because I wasn't receiving child support, and because I was doing so much for everybody else, I couldn't focus on my own life. And so they were the first ones to say, well, you are a single parent, so to expect that you could get more than a townhouse, that's kind of silly. Then that was their take on it. Not, well, wow, I've recognized that you've been financially abused by workplaces, by your partners, by men. That never came into the, it is always me, it was my fault. Well, I do look at that later and acknowledging, well, I was picking the wrong people. That's abusive. It was still abusive because the people I was attracted to or partnering up with, like, were future faking me, and I was acting the wife but not receiving the pay of the wife, if that makes sense. And so it was that's abusive. That was intentional. That was set up like that. And so now that I know better, now I can do better. I get that. But like the way they were coming across was very, it's all my fault. I deserve to be treated like this. And so when I teach other people about trying to protect themselves, it's not like I'm condoning abuse. I'm trying to point out that the expectation of a perfect world is delusional. And as long as you're willing to overgive to other people, there's going to be people that are always willing to take. And so that's where I've had to revise my taking until I can find out the true intentions of somebody else. And so when I started purging all my emotions, what it helped was I moved from emotional more into logical. And I got so sick and tired of being treated like this, where I started treating them back like that. And at first I didn't know I was doing that intentionally, because I realized like these people were actually punishing me with isolation and punishing me with silence. And I didn't realize that at the point. And so it got to a point when I started learning more about narcissists and hearing that term, because I was introduced to spirituality first, and I got thrown into that twin flame bullshit. And I got caught up in those readings, the love readings of like, why you're doing this, they're doing this, or there's a lot of toxic content out there that will convince you of anything. And like, I watch a lot of love readings, and what I finally came up with, it's like, if I need a love reading about someone who I'm not talking to, there's a reason I'm not talking to them, and it's just not that deep for them, or they don't have the balls to approach me. And both of those things are not someone I want to be attached to. I've put myself in so many positions to be rejected and humiliated because I've had to put myself out there while I'm learning and growing. And so I've recognized if those people can't do the same, then they're not my person, and they don't have the same level of growth as I do. And so that's where I started to, because I was being pulled in, and the spiritual community will try to convince you that feeling comfortable with someone means that that's your soulmate, and that is not a soulmate. That is a repetitive pattern. I feel comfortable with this person, but I don't know anything about them. That is investing in someone without finding out the information. That would be like handing your money over to something without looking at the reviews, without, knowing what kind of product you're buying, and knowing if there's a return policy, or like getting information. And so I started moving from my emotions because I had purged so much. At the point now, I also had to be aware of where like I was just trigger tears, what I had to get to the point where like, okay, I've cried enough about this. and let's move past the tears and let's try to get more into a solution in the logical mind. And so, I mean, there's a period of grieving, and you know, the frustration is there because it's from the past, but it's also in the moment. And then I had to learn, well, if I'm going to move into my future, I have to stop crying so much about this and recognize that this is just part of life. And so that's where the spiritual community, I started moving away from them because it felt like they were so tied up in the emotion and not where they were coming from, because they were tying emotion, and then they're tying it with, oh, these are not your emotions, these are other people's emotions. And so now you don't have any control. And so you're always going to be emotional. And to me, I found that to be a victim mindset, that I'm always going to be crying, you know, and then I'm always going to be taking on other people's emotional burdens. That's bullshit. That's a load of crap to me. And so I got out of the spiritual community when I started recognizing there's a lot of toxic ideas there, and talking about manifesting, and you know, me, I see manifesting as planning, as mind mapping, trial and error, but they don't talk about manifesting like that. They talk about, you know, seeing numbers and looking for signs, but as a child, I was looking for signs all the time for safety. And so that to me was not a healthy practice, to be constantly looking for signs that the universe is supporting me, because that seems codependent. How am I supporting myself? How am I showing up for myself? Where are the signs that I am independent and doing things for me, you know, for myself, and not relying on a universe to show up when they're never going to show up, you know? And don't get me wrong, I've had moments where, like, I've done the trust falls with the universe and I've been caught, but that only works for so long in certain areas of life. And I had to get to the point where I'm like, okay, I can't keep relying on, like, it's almost like a safety net where I have been caught a number of times, don't get me wrong, but it's not something to rely on, you know? It's because at that time I was in a very low state, and I was being abused, and I was in my nervous system was shot. And so I had to stop relying on that, and I had to start taking things into my own control. And so that's, once again, moving more into logical mind. And so the more you move into logic, you can become the devil's advocate. And so that's exactly what happened when I was dealing with these men, when I was dealing with these people. I realized whatever I was doing was my kids were gonna do. And so if they can't see a real life example of how I dealt with these situations and got out of them, then like that, like, I mean, it's not that they can't figure, they're bright kids, they're resourceful, they can, but like, I wanted to make things easier. Like, yes, challenge is acceptable, struggle to a certain point, but like, poverty and bullying and abuse should not be part of life. And so, but also I had to find out information by trial and error, so like I could go and bring it back to them to be like, this is what I found when I do this, this is what happens with these types of people, right? In order to define who I could trust and who I could not, and who was good people and who was not. And because trusting people blindly was what I was raised in. I can't keep doing that. That's not working well for me. And I remember having a therapist saying, well, you just need to learn how to trust people again. And I thought, that is the most toxic advice I've ever learned or heard in my life, coming from a professional. Like, the problem was I'm overly trusting. Now you want me to learn how to trust people again? That's so fucked up. Like, what I would have preferred to hear is, you need to learn who safe people are. But she saw me as the problem. You know, she saw me as being triggered when I don't, like, at the time, I'm like explaining how it was challenging for me to go back into the 9 to 5 at this time, because like, I'm being triggered, no, I didn't even say that. I just said I'm finding it challenging to go back there because I don't want to ruin everything that I've built, right? And she thought it was, I was going to be triggered in that environment. I said, no, I'm having a problem in these workplaces because when I set up boundaries, I get targeted. And the look on her face, like, was like she didn't know what I was talking about. And I found it really odd with her, because this is the most recent therapist I've talked to, and she did not know where I was at on my healing journey. She didn't know. She didn't know because she's never done it herself. That's the problem. She has a lot of academic knowledge, but she actually hasn't done the work herself. And so I'm recognizing, like, the more you get more into logic and you start treating people the way they treat you, and you meet them where they're at, you start seeing they don't like that. You know, I have a neighbor that doesn't want to clean up after themselves and be accountable for like the behavior of the dog. And I'm not expecting perfection. I'm just expecting effort. And so there's no effort in the way to train their dog and make it, you know, and actually realizing like that barking is affecting everybody else too. That it's constant. It's not just a random bark. It's like ongoing, constant barking. And she couldn't think about how that would be affecting her neighbors. And then the garbage and like the mess that they make. They don't think about how that's like other people don't want to pick up after them. And so you call them out on that shit, they don't like it, you know? She's friendly when you're complimenting her garden, she's friendly. But when you try to tell her, hey, like this is obnoxious behavior coming from your puppy because it's all the time and it's constant and it's avoidable. It's avoidable. That's the problem. It's avoidable, and it's just because they're being lazy and not doing the work. And it's like a puppy. Like if you don't want to be around a puppy at this young stage, what the heck, you know? It just makes me wonder, like I'm pretty sure she has kids, so it just makes me wonder how she parented her kids. If that's how she treats a puppy at that young age, but her mature age of like, I think she's like 50, right? But these people will, that's what made me think, like these people are never, so the emotion says hope that these people will change. But the logic says these people are not going to change. And so I had to grieve a reconciliation with these members of my family, because it's easier for coworkers and partners and like that. It was easier to let them go. The one really took me because I really thought that that was meant to be my life partner, because it was hard for me to meet people and connect with people. So it wasn't that he was my soulmate. It was something I had to learn how to do. I had to learn how to put myself out there. And if I don't feel confident in putting myself out there, I had to ask why. And those are the areas that I started to develop. And so when I developed myself, I worked like while there was emotional periods of the frustration, the more confidence I built, the more clarity I got. And so I was able to see where these people that were trying to tell me how to live my life literally had no life experience at all. They were living their lives in fear and opinions and no real life experience. And so when you start to do that, you start to take them down from their pedal and you start to realize how low you've placed yourself. And I'm still trying to get a clear idea of who I really am as a person, because I still haven't met my soul tribe, and I'm starting to put myself out there more, and I'm starting to see other people that are like-minded and think like me, and I'm realizing, wow, I'm not so different in the way that these people tried to make me feel like I was crazy for having these expectations and these standards. And it's just, I'm expecting them from the wrong people. And I had to start recognizing myself in other people, not in the wounding end of things, but in the higher vibe of like, oh, this person does do these things, so I can expect that from them, right? And now I also have to recognize where some people do these only when they're seen and not in, so that's another thing. It's like hanging around long enough and not giving too much in order to make sure you get the clarity, like, are they doing this for show or is who they are, right? And so like I can recognize these traits in myself, so then I can start seeing them in myself. So the more I heal, the more I see myself and other people in a more positive way, and I no longer am connecting to the old version of myself with these people who just want to live their life like that. And to be honest, even the self that I'm recognizing in them, like I'm like, oh, I remember I used to do that myself. I was like so hard on myself. I used to like see myself so badly to the point where I'm like, I wasn't even that bad. I wasn't even that bad. I was struggling. I was being abused. These people, well, I don't know that they're being abused, but they're abusive. And where I was falling short was I just couldn't get my life together because I was being targeted so often, where I couldn't even get my structure, my foundation set up to stand up and gain strength and build balance. These people have resources. They have money. They have friends. They have all the things that I didn't have when I was behaving in this manner. So like mine was due to reactive abuse, and theirs is due to controlling and bullying behavior. There's a difference there. And I couldn't see that at first. And I start to recognize these people are bullies and they use and abuse people. I don't do that. I don't put myself out there as a victim. You know, I don't try to make people feel sorry for me. I try to empower people. That's not these people. They try to make you, you know, I recognize people who try to come off as a victim are victims. And what that means is they're not empowered and they're going to be a user and abuser. And so when I started getting that information, it helped me move from my emotional and I wasn't investing with my emotions anymore. I wasn't putting hope in others that were clearly not interested in changing. I wasn't giving my blind trust to people because they were friendly to me, to my face, and sharing chocolate bars and, offering acts of service that, like, they weren't just offering acts of service, they expected that back. They expected blind loyalty back by helping me. That's not how I rock. That's not how I roll. And while I'm not in a place to help people move, I mean, I help my kids move. They're my kids. But see, they're my kids. So family, I would help family move, but that's how I am. I just expect because you're my family, I'm going to help you. These people are my family, and they were doing things to receive. They weren't doing things just because we're family and that's what you do for. They were doing things because if they're helping me move into that house at some point in time, they're expecting that if they need that house, if they need my resources, that would be because they helped me move into that house. Now it's partially yours. And that was the expectation. I don't expect to live in my kid's house or apartment because I helped them move. That's not expectation. I'm making myself independent. I would be homeless before I would expect that. If they want me there and they say, I want you to live here if you're challenged, that's fine. But I'm not expecting, I'm not putting that burden on their plate. They're paying for their home. They deserve that space, right? They don't deserve the burden of a parent. And that's when I had to start also realizing that emotionally, I was placing burdens on my kids, even as I was clearing up my own emotions. As long as I continued to make bad decisions and stay comfortable, that was placing emotional burdens on my children. And that's not what I wanted either, because just as I was worrying about my parents, and they're not, it's not like a spoken request, you're seeing that your parents are not doing what needs to be done in order to remain healthy, to gain prosperity, to become independent of self. And so, like, I had to recognize where I was doing that too, still to a certain degree, to my kids. And so that's an unfair burden for them. Your kids aren't meant to sit here to worry about your parents' health and safety. The other way around, I had kids so I could be of support and guidance to them. And not in a way to enable them, in a way to grow them, to give them growth, not to stagnate them, and to allow them to choose their own path, to allow them to walk away if they feel like we're not at a good place right now. Is it painful? Yeah. But when I had that situation with one of my kids, I didn't look at them and be like, I couldn't see immediately what they're talking about. So I sat with myself and I realized I wasn't the parent that I thought I was, And even though I could see what I was doing as a parent that was different than that I received, I realized that I was still playing out patterns from my past and my parents. And so I acknowledged that and I apologized for that, but not even an apology, but more of a recognition to say, I realize that I've hurt you in this way. And even though it wasn't my intention, I still did it. That's still damage. Even though I had good intentions, I still hurt my kids. And to not be able to have a parent who can acknowledge that, and they give you just like a woe is me, I did the best that I could in that time, and still not see them do changes, create change, when the burden of parenting is off their plate and they're still not willing. To me, I could understand as a parent, it's challenging to make change because life is happening so fast and you've got kids and it's unpredictable and all this stuff. I could understand that. But even after we were no longer living in your house, you still chose toxic partners. You still chose poorly. You're still not choosing yourself. You're still choosing other people over me and our connection. And that's painful to acknowledge that your parents are doing that. But it's even more painful when you realize that you were doing it to your kids. But yet I had to go there. I had to recognize where I was abusive to my kids, where I was a burden to my children, and where I wasn't the best version of myself. Well, I did some great things. I did some really shitty things where I'm like, that's not great. You deserve better. And so even though my kids live on their own at this point, I'm still their mom. I'm still here to support them. I'm the only parent and family member that has been consistent and supportive. And I've had, I've had friends suggest I move out west with them and just leave my kids now that they're adults. And I thought that was the most fucking selfish thing I've ever heard. I'm not going to move away from my kids. Yes, they're grown, but they're my family. If they choose to move, that's their choice. I'm not going to follow them around. That's not what they want. They need some independence. They need some space. I give them the space. But I also have to give them that apology, that awareness, like, wow, you know what? I think I did pretty good for a single mom. Yes, that may be true. But what is also true is because I was a single parent and I had toxic traits within myself, I also did damage. Yes, I killed it as a single mom, but yes, I did damage to my kids in that way because I didn't have healthy ways of dealing with my emotions. I didn't know how to discipline kids properly. I didn't know how to manage life because I was not taught to. I was taught how to make impulsive decisions, to make decisions by my emotions and not logic. And there's a different sort of, like, I don't know how to label this, but there's like a controlled, it's like it seems like very cutthroat and black and white way of thinking, and that sounds logical when you say it, but it's not. There's a closed off, controlled way, and that's where my parents also led from. We do this because of this, and it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to make sense. This is how we do things. Like the church had a lot of rules for no reason, and then spirituality had no accountability. You're just allowed to be free in who you are. And I don't believe in that either, because we live in society where our actions affect other people. And so you can't just behave in a certain way where you're free will all over the place and, run around naked like a child. Like, we live in society where we're meant to be considerate of other people too, And so during this process, I've been purging emotions and grieving what I never received. There's moments of humiliation where I thought I had that. I thought I had it. I thought I was in a, when I make these changes in life, there's, from religion to spirituality, that's an extreme swing. And so what I had to realize is I was meant to meet back in the middle. And while I've had very conservative viewpoints, I've had very liberal ones as well. And so, like, I'm not to one side or the other. I had to come back to center and realize, like, I take this part and I take this part, but I don't stand with either side. I stand alone. I'm independent. I have my own thoughts. I don't need a party to back me. I walk by myself. I'm a lone wolf. I literally am a lone wolf walking because I've chosen that. Because I've chosen to see where I can, the resentment. When you have resentment, that's a blame. You're blaming somebody else. That's a victim mentality that's saying, my life is like this because you did this. But for me, that's, you haven't worked through the grieving period and you haven't been able to see the lesson for the blessing, and how if you would have continued on that path without having this, realization that that is wrong, on the wrong path, then you would have had to come back all that way. And so resentment says, like, I have more work to do, but, like, it makes sense we have more work to do. I'm 46, on 47 this year. I have a lot of learning. It would be weird to think that I've just found all the answers at 47. That's not normal. And so, like, I've come across a lot of people who are so sure of themselves, overly confident, and with a lack of experience, that think they found the answers. And they're just ruling their life out of resentment, and then becoming the haters because they never thought to think about the other side of the story. Like, when I come across an extreme opinion, that's a sign for me to look at what they're not seeing, because all women are not one way and all men are not one way. And while, we have some very toxic ways that men live and that women live, it's on both coins. It's on both sides, Women use men for money and men use women for sex. And both of them have more growing to do. And so when I started to recognize that the people I was following were speaking things that weren't true, that got me more into my logical mind and realizing that why am I putting these people up on pedestals when I know how to learn. I can learn. I can take information and I can sift through it and I can pick out truth. I've done it with myself. I've done it with other people. So I'm doing it now with mentors or people I see to be mentors. And now I can say, no, this is not the way I want to live. I don't want to live my life angry at men. Do I have to protect myself against certain types of men? Yes, I do. But I also have to protect myself against a lot of women too. Because women are just as angry as men. And women can be just as insecure as men. And women can be just as competitive as men. You just don't want to see it because you haven't got past that point in learning. That is part of the process, because a lot of men hurt me, and I used to think that all men are just that way, like all men watch porn, all men cheat on their women. I used to think that I just have to accept that and settle in that, but I didn't realize there's another option of just staying single. But I had to get out my codependency and my centering of men and my ideas about the fact that I needed a man to make money, because that's why I was there. That's why I was hanging on to these men, is because I thought I couldn't make enough money on my own. And I also thought emotionally I couldn't be balanced without a man in my life to, get that sort of like, what is I getting from it? I wasn't even getting anything from these men emotionally. They were emotionally unavailable because I was because I was so much in my emotions at the time that I was like just pushing past logic, and I was caught up in the feel. This person feels comfortable, but I don't know them. Well, how is that comfortable? How do you feel comfortable with a man you don't even know? And I had to start questioning my belief systems. That was taught to me in religion, to follow, the wrong people. I was taught to blindly trust men. I was taught to blindly trust other people. And even in spirituality, they teach you, like, when you feel comfortable with a stranger, that person is a soulmate. No, they're not. That is an old pattern. And so, like, there's weird belief systems that were coming up. And there's a lot of purging coming up with that too, because you look back and you're like, wow, I've been living my life like this for so long. And you just have to grieve lost time. You have to grieve that. And then the frustrating part is, as you start recognizing, like, I've been doing things for so long, but so wrong, like even financially. I got myself into some financial binds, and recognizing like it's going to take me a while to recuperate that. And the challenging part is I'm going to be in that energy of like only receiving what I need and never what I want. That can be very depleting. Depressing. That can be very, because it just feels like this is going to take me forever to, like, when you realize you bought a house where the previous owner went out of their way to hide major expensive like issues with the house, and you rushed into that decision because at the time you needed to get out of where you were and you wanted to be somewhere with space and room to breathe, and you realized I made a really bad decision. I didn't ask questions. I thought I knew enough about houses because I'd already bought, like, this is my 4th house, I think, that I bought. So I figured I had a good idea of what to look for, but I also didn't think that people would do that. And so in the last few years, it's like recognizing where I didn't think people would go that low. I recognized that in Frudenberg Knock. I recognized that in Bully Bunches, where people that were friendly to my face were really disgusting, cruel people behind my back. And I really learned a lot about who people claim to be and who they actually are, and how to recognize that, and how to start asking questions, like real questions, not only of them, but of myself. I had to cut myself off, because limerence, when you have not received what you're meant to as a child, you make yourself out to be that princess, in kind of a scenario like your dad can't be that bad, because you're seeing other fathers in media and things, and some of those are toxic as fuck as well. When you look back at what you used to watch and the messages that are woven into those TV shows, it's actually kind of gross. And that's nostalgia. So when you're in nostalgia, that's not necessarily a good place to be. That's an delusional place. When I'm going back to the past, See, that's an emotional place. Nostalgia is emotional. So when you're in nostalgia, recognize that that's not a good place. Well, it's helpful to help you go back and look at that. It's also, you need to go back now to the logic and be like, what makes me feel like I'm attached to that past moment, that past feeling? What made me feel good about that? You know what? Like, that person was kind to my face and they were charming, but they never had my back. They were never for me. They were using and abusing me. So why do I feel like a longing connection to some of these people when in reality, they were never for me? They didn't want good things for me. And so it's a process of like calling yourself out when you go back there, because it's not a crime to go back to the past and be nostalgic, but when you're there, you're meant to get a logical clarity as to why you're feeling so attached to that past person, those past memories, and what is it in there that you can that you're attached to, but that you can provide for yourself moving forward. And that's how you start clearing up this emotional baggage that you're carrying, because these people, what happened was you're being partnered with that charm, that love bombing, but it also came with the backstabbing energy. And you could never actually, while you thought that you were connected to these people and you could rely on them for certain things, you couldn't. You could only rely on them as long as you were showing up a certain way. So once you started to step up and they saw that you were leveling up, that triggered them. That really triggered them, because I know this happened with a coworker when I was talking about some of my side hustle, and I was doing really well with like my diet, my workout, and everything. So like I got the ball rolling, and I think he thought I was going to leave that environment, which, I mean, it doesn't matter. I had nothing to do. I didn't like that guy anyways. Like, I made the best out of my situation, but like that guy was like, I think he sensed that I was getting momentum, and so I can only imagine what he does, excuse me, to his own family members. And so, yeah, so I started learning. The more I started falling, like when I fell into nostalgia, I fell into logic. What was that? What was the real? I had to get the painful truth, because emotion keeps you in the what ifs, you know, because you feel good, because it feels sad. You don't want to feel that sadness that I have to disconnect from that person, because you already have all that sadness in you that you're unaware of. You know, it's already in you. You already have seen, but you've ignored what you've been seeing through your childhood. And because you've also had this fucked up programming that tells you what you experience is actually pretty healthy or is acceptable or whatever it is, like, there's something subconscious that is telling you that this is not healthy and this is not okay. Much like when you, connect with a predator, you're feeling something is off. And so that leads me next to, so depression was, all the emotions that I had carried since childhood, but it was also like where I had been receiving so little and been giving so much. And that was making me feel sad, because I could see how much I was giving, and then I started recognizing and I started seeing how little I was receiving. When you start to allow yourself to see the truth of the situation, that's when you can start expressing these emotions, and when you can start moving away from them. These people were never for me. Yes, they're family. That is sad. That is disgusting. And I had to get to the point of being pissed off that I was giving to these people, and that I thought that I was worthy of that bullshit behavior. And that's, you have to get to that point of where you, and then you get to where you have like a acceptance, and you're like, this is the situation, this is who they are, and they're never going to change. As long as I leave that door open, like, they may change. When you see how long you've been working on yourself, and when you recognize that they have been doing nothing but just making excuses and just trying on different costumes to pretend like they've changed and done different, when you actually allow yourself, and sometimes that you do have to take a conversation with them to get that painful truth out of them and call them out. So I don't see any shame in, like, if you feel like, oh, I went back to them, or I took a phone call from them, or I answered a message. I get a lot of clarity in those moments. So don't feel shame that you thought and you were vulnerable with them. That vulnerability, they see that as a weakness, and so you're going to get a lot of answers by being vulnerable with a narcissist, in my opinion, from the ways that I've done it. And they see that as a weakness, so they let their shield down, their guard down, and they show you who they truly are. And they're going to tell you answers, and they're going to lie right to your face, and it's going to be like, you're going to know what to ask and what to look for in those situations when you do that. The more you grieve and release the emotion. So a lot of people will say, well, I don't like being depressed. This is not good to be depressed. It doesn't feel good to be depressed. But like, you've been avoiding all of these sad feelings for a lifetime because you were told not to, that you weren't allowed to. So depression is giving yourself permission to feel the sadness, to feel the disappointment, to grieve what you didn't receive, and to actually gain clarity on what you were receiving and grieve that too, to be like, wow, like, you know what, I was giving this and I was only receiving this. That clarity is going to create sadness, you know, because you really wanted to create a connection with these people, but they didn't. It was only based on you giving to them and you receiving nothing. And that is sad. So grieve that. That's something to give yourself permission to feel sad. A lot of people think feeling sad is negative emotions and they're going to fuck up like their future. But like, you're going to keep bringing in the same shit if you don't release those emotions. You have to release those emotions to look at them to see, why am I feeling this way? I'm feeling this way because I'm not receiving what I'm giving. I'm feeling this way because I'm feeling overwhelmed and underlooked. I'm feeling this way because I show up at work and I work my ass off and all I get rewarded with is more work instead of recognition and more pay. When I can clearly see the boss, they both have 2 cars, they're making money. They're making money here. They can pay, they can afford to pay me. And if they can't, they shouldn't be in business, you know? They need to watch their spending. So when you allow yourself to recognize, like, I am not, and it took me a while because you doubt yourself. You've been made to doubt yourself, right? Because you've been put down so low and these people have put them up on pedestals. So they've manipulated you into not trusting your intuition and who you really are. And they've done that by the loud reactions when you try to challenge them. You know, they get loud because they don't want you to try that again. And they also do it where they tend to give to you. So when they do something, they're like, oh, well, they just did me a favor. They just gave me that. I don't want to make them upset by telling them I think they just, you know, fucked me over, you know. Or I don't want to make them upset because they just gave me a chocolate bar and now they're calling me and they want to sit on the phone for 4 hours of my time and use me as a counselor, which would cost them like close to $1,000. And I don't want to say no to that because they gave me this small piece of fucking chocolate. You know what I mean? Like, it's dumb shit like that. It's dumb shit. And when you start to see it, you can't unsee it. And that's where you get to the point of being pissed off. And this isn't being resentful that you gave to the people. That is part of it. You got to get the validation. When I was in resentment and blame, I needed to watch content that validated me, because when you're being emotionally and mentally abused and financially abused, a lot of people don't want to see it and recognize it because either they've experienced it or they know if they were to be in your position, they would experience it. So it's like a truth they don't want to see. And so, of course, the bully doesn't want to acknowledge it because they're benefiting from the situation. And the feeder fish of the sharks, they don't want to acknowledge it because they don't want to stand up and talk against a bully because they're weak, right? And so a lot of situations where, like, it was really hard because it's like, this has been since I was a child. This was my upbringing, you know? And so it was my norm to not question, you know. Christianity is much like that, you know. The pastor is kind of like that. Like, we don't question his perspective or take on the Bible. But when I hear like different things from the Bible, like I had Sunday school, I went to church, but I have not studied the Bible, and nor will I, because I just see certain things that come out of there, and I see the way Christians react and treat people. And while they're all about giving, there's a certain like underlying expectation from that. And if it's not an expectation, it's like a facade. You know, even if they don't expect you to give back to them, they expect to be seen as a good person because I gave to you. But like, what's on your internet? What are you watching? How do you actually treat people? You know, there's people who think they're good people and they talk shit and they gossip about people because they're sympathizing. Oh, I feel so bad about so-and-so because they're homeless and they're, you know, they have to go here and there. And it's like, you've just divulged my information, my private information to other people to fake sympathy, but in order to make yourself feel big and me look small. When in reality, if those people met me in person, they'd know I'm large and in charge. And so like those aren't my people, right? So it gets to a point where the better you get at this, the more you do it, the better practice you get. And even speaking your truth is an emotional place, because it can get you into wondering, like, did I just do that? Did I do that? You know, and so that's where the anxiety comes in. Anxiety tells me that I need, if I'm not feeling certain about something, I need more, I need to get more confident. And I'll get more confident because I'm either going to practice more, I'm going to get more information about the situation. And that means if I feel anxious around a connection with somebody, something's feeling off. And so it's either because it's out of balance and I'm doing something for someone that, I've had this with my kids, I've had to call them out on it and they don't like it and they're not necessarily going to agree with it, because the timing of it can be like, they're like, oh, it seems like you're always, you know, trying to ruin my good time. But it's like, well, no, I'm tired of picking up after you and I don't have time for a good time because I'm too busy picking up after your mess. And so while the timing seems off, the problem is you have all this time for good time and all this money, but you're not paying me, you know, a fair share for living here. And you're also not picking up your fair share. And if you're claiming to be depressed, then be depressed and rest. But don't be going out partying and drinking. And you know what I mean? And while these activities take time to release them, it's where I don't see the effort, that's the problem. If I don't see the effort, that's the problem. I don't see, like, it feels like a denial of like their actual behavior. And so like they're quietly making me to be the problem. Well, like, you know, you can have people that will oh, okay, yep, that's yeah, I see that. But then like behind your back, they're talking shit. Behind your back, they're trying to change other people's opinions of you, right? You know, and with kids, they don't want to acknowledge, like, because it's a learning curve, right? You're meant to gradually learn how to become independent. And so that's why, like, when they move out on their own, like, I'm still here for support and guidance. I'm here to help them. I have a car, you know, and I have resources that are available to me and I make it available to them. I don't expect my kids just to be off on their own, you know, totally, completely by themselves. But I've also taught them, and I'm here to teach them, like, how to work through certain scenarios. And I trust that they're capable. I trust that they'll figure it out. And if they won't figure it out, they know that I'm here to help them. It's not just them by themselves. And it's very different from what I grew up with, where the only way I'm being helped is if I'm kissing the ass and begging just to be denied. You know, it's like a power play. My parents see me asking them for help as a power play. And it's kind of gross. And they'll prioritize other people. It's like they'll let other people live in their house. But when I was in between houses, about to be in between houses, when I asked my mom, like, could me and my kids and pets stay there? She had a cat that was always hiding, but she was afraid that would freak out her cat, which I can understand that part. But at the same time, it's like, if the cat's always freaking out hiding, what's the difference of us living there? I didn't like, it was a feral cat she brought into her house. The feral cat should have never entered the house. And so it's just weird that certain people make certain decisions where now, like, they can't support you, but like, well, then I can't support you either. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine. I'll get it. I'll figure it out. I always have. But I no longer support people who are so conditionally, selectively supportive for me, to where I'd be willing to drop everything for them to help them. And I just recognized I was in line with a lot of people who, when I needed help, when I was struggling with my home and things like that, the only way they were going to help is if they were going to get something out of it, and like be seen as a good person when they're not. And also, you know, it's so funny. People offer you, oh, I can loan you money, but it's only based on if you have access, if they get access to my home. They're not just going to loan me money, period. And the money that they're loaning me is not even their money. So it's just really interesting when you start to look at these things, and then you start saying, no, I'm not going to accept that. And I've also experienced this in of service, people of service, like you know, community services, you know, things like EI as well, and like social services and like local community services, where I've been targeted and judged and ignored and made to feel like I don't deserve support from women. From women. I'm going to say it again. from women. Okay, so I've also had family members that claim to support me, but they will not support me because they don't believe in what I'm doing. But I don't have to believe in what you're doing. If like I'm going to support you and allow you to figure that out on your own, I'm still going to support you. You know, like it's one thing if you're like doing something damaging to yourself, but if like you're just trying to find your way through life, and you know, I realized like I wasn't into religion, and then I realized I'm not really into spirituality because there's a lot of misbeliefs, and I'll do a video on that I find is like keeps you stuck. But I found my way. I'm finding my way. And you know what? If I do like playing with cards, oracle cards, that's my preference. And just because they don't see the benefit in it, or they don't know how to do it, or it's interesting. I had a lot of judgment, like, oh, you don't have the long nails to do cards on YouTube. Like, are you like, so like I knew that they had been watching videos and they had watched my channel, but there's no likes, there's no comments of support, there's no DM saying, hey, I just checked out one of your readings, and I really think the advice you give is really helpful. While I don't agree with your oracle cards and your way of doing it, just because I don't know much about it, I still love the advice that you're giving. I think that's super helpful, especially when some of the advice in some of these arenas are toxic. You know, I didn't receive any of that. I just received crickets. No conversations, just judgment, you know, without asking questions. And so I had to learn where I had to ask more questions, and I had to communicate more. And I got to the point where I was over communicating, and that I found was damaging as well, because it was helpful. I recognize when I feel like I'm pulling teeth from somebody to try to get them to see my side, and my side is not that hard to understand. I realize those people are closed off and they don't want good things for me. And I had a boss at Bully Bunches who did that, where he couldn't see that there was a man that was stalking me, and he couldn't understand the way I described it, and he required proof for me to prove that the man was stalking me. And if you understand stalking, it's really hard to get proof. And so the fact that he just couldn't even understand the concept of that, and required me to either apologize for the statement that I made, the accusation, or or leave because I didn't have proof. That's what it was. And so I left, because no way, this was not the first issue I had with that man. He was not paying me my worth. I was doing a leadership role and I was not getting paid for it. He had offered other positions to other people, and so when I became full-time, he didn't offer that to me. So I knew he was never going to offer me. He's never going to see me for my value. He's never going to pay me for my value. He's never going to pay me my worth. And he was very passive aggressive. He didn't like to be told when things were inefficient on the floor. I remember pointing them out to him, and like I would get passive aggressive behavior. So when I needed hours, he wouldn't give me hours, but he gave another employee that same week hours. And so that's when he said finally, oh yeah, you can have those hours if you want. I'm like, where did you find all this work within the week when you told me I was going to be at least a month out before you could provide me with work? And mind you, I could see tons of things that were inefficient on the floor. I had spotted so many things where I'm like, I could make this run better. I could make productivity better. But he didn't want to hear that, because it wasn't him suggesting it, right? And he needs to be the one in charge. And his wife was the same. Just very, they don't ask their employees for solutions when it's like your employees are on the floor all the time. Why wouldn't you? Because they thought they were God. They thought they were above their employees. They look down on their employees. They paid them less. They don't pay them what they should. And they just see them as a tool and not a person. And that's where I couldn't be in that environment of productivity, because I do believe that you can balance productivity and your people. And so it's a winning situation. And so I can't rock with people who don't do that. And so a lot of situations I've been through, I was put through because I was standing up for myself, and I had to leave. Otherwise, I was expected to endure this abuse, right? This condescending behavior from bosses, this inappropriate pay for what I was bringing to the table, to the room. And while I didn't have the academic, resume, because of my abuse, it makes it really hard for me at this point to retain certain information. I can memorize it, but I need to practice it hands-on, as opposed to just learn it and keep moving through it. So like an apprenticeship would be better for me, because like I like to learn and then apply it, learn and then apply it. And then that's how I also find ways to be more efficient, because I've had to do a lot of work as one person. I've had to take on so many roles. I'm a single mom. I work hard in my roles. I was providing leadership position, and I was recognizing emotional abuse and mental abuse in the workplace, but I was not being paid for that, and that's the boss's job also. So I just realized, like, all these things, like my emotional stability was being affected negatively as long as I was in these environments. And so what I also recognized is, like, I was overly emotionally invested in these places. So now that I'm considering going back in the 9 to 5 because my bills tell me I have to, I'm looking at, like, now when I go back in, I recognized before I was just way too invested in these companies that were not invested in me. So I'm bringing my energy back. I've related it to no longer being the wife, playing there's like a saying, don't play the wife until you got the ring. So this is what I'm doing now, and I'm applying it to my work world. Because I used to think if I worked really hard, I would be recognized for my hard work and I'd be rewarded. And that has not been the case for me. And so while it is important to look for a boss who can value what I have to offer, I also have to recognize where it's not being recognized. And so I'm not gonna show up in my full, value until I recognize it's safe, and then I'm gonna be rewarded for it. And that's my new move moving forward. Is like, I just realized I was so over invested in all these people emotionally, these workplaces, and now I'm gonna bring it back because I would go home and I was exhausted because I'd done all this work. And while I love working fast, because I equate like movement with exercise, and I feel like 2 birds 1 stone. I'm working really fast, I'm getting exercise, that's a win. I'm getting the product out. But what's not a win is being exploited for your hard work and your hustle while everyone else around you is picking their nose and you're doubling the rates. And like, that's not okay. And then you also get targeted by them because they don't like that you're faster and you're being told, slow down, you're making us look bad. I don't want to be in that kind of room, right? So I'm not going to just target myself for no reason while I'm getting paid the same as everybody else. I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to balance it out. I'm also going to bring more play and joy into my life, because I find that when I get overworked, I fall easily back into my freeze state. So I have to recognize when I'm in that freeze state, what am I taking on that's too much? What is not my responsibility, and am I prioritizing, and what does that look like? So yes, I would love to work as a YouTuber, but I'm not there. It's in its hobby format, right? And I'm looking at doing coaching, but I don't have clientele yet to support my household. So that's where I say I do have to go back in a 9 to 5, but I can't do it the way I did before. So I have to show up differently, and I have to match the energy that I'm receiving. So that means I match the pay that I'm receiving. And for me, it's hard to bring myself back because that's just the type of person I am, but I have to save that for the right room, which is my house. I have to save that energy for my projects and my investments, and my kids, instead of, I wish I would have focused more on like investing more time with my kids. I just didn't think they wanted to be around me when they were younger, and I thought they were bored with me, so I thought they wanted to be around other people. But I wish I would have just redirected my time and attention to me and my kids, instead of trying to find a man that could help support us, because the men are not supportive emotionally or financially, in my opinion, from what I've met this far. They've been very abusive and manipulative and opportunistic, and it's really gross. It's actually really gross. And even understanding, like, it's just really gross when you look back to who you were dating and you're like, why did I do that? And that's something I gotta process too. It's like, you gotta forgive yourself. Instead of forgiving other people, I learned that I had to forgive myself, because as long as I was like holding myself to these harsh conditions based on a lack of knowledge, like, that's where the forgiveness comes, because I'm like, I didn't know better. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I was programmed like this. I was raised to believe these things. And so that's part of it too, is like releasing the belief systems and forgiving yourself for your past actions, and just doing better moving forward. And that's where the guilt comes in. You relieve the guilt, because like I was making a lot of decisions based on guilt. Like, I got to do this because I got to be better for my kids, but my kids were already doing for themselves. And like, I started being better by, I stopped engaging with these men. And then after that, my kids were free to say, like, we never liked him. We never liked them. Like, this is something like we tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen, and I wouldn't listen. And I hate that I didn't listen. But part of the problem was the programming I was under. And it is that should be considered, you know, abusive in nature, the way you're telling somebody to accept this horrible behavior. That is mental abuse in my mind. Like, trying to state that this is all you're willing to accomplish, this is what you have to settle for, is an abusive man. That's fucked up. So yeah, once I started recognizing what I was still being, like, I removed myself from the people, I realized how I was creating these emotions within myself, and then I had to look at my choices, and then I had to look at also, like, my belief systems. And it's just kind of like a refining process that I kept going through. And then it just would push it further into my life. So it started with family, then it was family, partner, friends, coworkers, bosses, people of service, people close to me. It's the closer they are, where you have less control over your interaction, that's the hardest boundary I found, because you have to see them more often, and it feels uncomfortable. And so, like, the most recent situation has been with a neighbor, and I'm like, oh my God, we live next door. The last thing I want is confrontation with a neighbor, because I didn't have a fence. Their windows overlook my yard, and I'm just like, I can't hide from them. I wasn't meant to hide. These people want you to hide. And that's the intention of the abuse, is to hide yourself, hide from them, because they don't like being faced with your light. And that is the problem with these abusers. They're trying to dim your light. They're trying to make you small so they feel big. You are their supply in a jar. They don't want anyone else to have access to you, but they also don't want anyone to know about you, because if someone was going to see you in your full glory, your full potential, that is going to make them feel small, because you're going to attain something that they never could by yourself, from the ground up, without the help. And that is their fear, and that is not mine anymore. It used to be mine, to be seen, to be targeted. And once you've done it so many times, you get good with getting back to a place where you don't doubt yourself. And I go through this process a number of times, and my daughter was helpful with me, for this time. And I don't even think, sometimes she'll like, I'll thank her later. She's like, well, I didn't even hear what you said. And she had just made a comment. So sometimes, like, they're not even aware that they're giving you feedback that, isn't that deep, but is helpful to release that pain and receive that clarity. So I think you have to release the pain in order to receive the clarity. And here's the thing too, is karma is not based on if you're a good person. It's based on your education of something. So you could be the best person. I was the best person. I was a people pleaser. I trusted people. I didn't call them out on their shit. I fawned. I just was blindly loyal, blind trusting. I was the best person receiving shit. So karma isn't based on necessarily your good actions. It's like the education and the clarity that you can get, and how you can stay out of the chaos and the confusion. Because the people who see clearly are getting lots of money. The people who are bullying are getting lots of money. They're getting a lot of benefits there. I don't know how long that's going to last, because internally they're a mess, right? And they are it's like they have some clarity on certain things. They know how to abuse people and to get things from them. They know how to use people, right? They know how to do that. But at some point, when we start to educate other people on what that looks like, so you can move away from it, or at least fight against it and protect yourself, that they don't know how to learn anything else. This is their shadow sides. This is what they've been relying on in other people. So people are going to start learning and educating themselves, and start pulling themselves away, start calling them out, start, public. I do believe in certain versions of public shaming when there's a bullying system that is happening, especially when it's one against some. I definitely believe that needs to be implemented for certain things. And even if it's not like, the public shaming, it's just like speaking up for yourself and advocating for yourself. And the more people do this, the less bullies are going to be able to rule, I believe. So it's just a matter of empowering the people. And like I said, this is happening. I've experienced a lot of these people in small towns, small businesses, small companies, that these buildings are like, don't have a large amount of individuals in them, but they make a ton of money. Like Frunberg Knock, a ton of money. Bully Bunches, they're making a ton of money, right? But it's in those environments where I experience these situations. And the thing is, nobody want to listen. You know, they just want to get you out the door. They don't want you to change. The thing is, the way things are running in these buildings are toxic. It's not great, but it's good enough, right? Because they're getting the dollar, but it's not benefiting the people. And so you got to understand, when you have CEOs and bosses that aren't checking in on all their locations, that's on them. They don't care because it's not affecting them. And so they are part of the problem. And so when I recognize that, it helps me get out of the environment and into my body and into my action and doing things that are for me. Like I said, it's taken me a couple of runs to do this, but each time I do it, I get more information, I get more clarity, and I get less emotional. And the less emotional you are, the less they can control you. So when you have more control of your emotions, they can't control you. And so that's where the clarity helps you to control, because instead of feeling bad or feeling guilty or feeling shame or feeling trapped or feeling scared or feeling hopeless or feeling like, you know, you're going to be homeless, like all these things, instead of feeling all these things, you pull yourself out of those emotions. Like, feel it, because it's frustrating. I feel disappointed every time I experience an individual like this. I'm disappointed, and I feel like I haven't been supported or protected. But the idea for me, for, you know, God is more about guidance and showing us what we're capable of, instead of requiring God to be the one to do it for us, right? Like God, I don't think God does things for us. I think he shows us and can help us align with things that are for us. God, source, energy, universe, whatever you want to call it. But we're meant to take the action. We're meant to build strength within ourselves, so we don't have to rely on the universe. So we can see these things for ourselves. So we understand, this is the best for me. And if I have to go back in this way, I'm going to protect myself instead of overgive of myself, and just do it differently. Like, sometimes it's just about, a lot of the times, just about doing things different. And for me, it's usually like, well, I advise, like, I try to point out, you need to be careful when you go from one side to the other. There are certain arenas where you got to go, when you're over giving, you got to go to the other side and undergive, and just to assess the situation, then build up from there. You know, whenever you're starting a job, you're just starting. So like, take a look at what everyone else is allowed to do and fall in line. That's what I'm going to do, because you know what? I'm no longer going to give of myself for free. I'm too tired. I just don't have it in me. And so that's how I've moved from my emotions into more a logical mindset. If you need help with this, you can book a coaching one-on-one. They are $200 for an hour. And the idea is to teach you how to do this for yourself, so you don't have to rely on somebody else to do it for you. That's my goal, is to teach people what I learned. Not to tell you how I did it, but like, just to give an example of how I did it. And then you can, if you find the tools that I used helpful, then you can implement them into your own practice, into your own way of being, right? So that's the only thing I'm doing. And I hope people find it helpful. So on this channel, I do a lot of different things. Like, I do enjoy doing cards once in a while. I don't like being a card reader, putting out a number of different readings. I just feel like they're all very similar, and it's just not something, I mean, if I have time and I get bored, I might do that, but it's usually like a reading here and there. And I don't do tarot. I mean, I'm adding tarot in, but I'm not a tarot reader. I usually go by emotions and lessons that are needing to be learned. And I believe our emotions are here to show us what we need to give to ourselves and provide for ourselves, and what we're not doing. So when you feel those emotions come up, when you feel frustrated, that is a patience. When you feel resentment and blame, that is a victim mind, and you are handing your control over, and you are meant to take it back and empower yourself and say, you know what, I'm not gonna let this person fuck with me. And then I go back and I look at, how did I let them get so close? How did I let them affect me? whether it be emotionally or mentally. How did I let them get in my head? You know, where am I doubting myself right now? So they picked up on something. They picked up on a seed of doubt, a seed of fear, and I allowed it to grow, right? So I got to look at why did I let that belief system grow inside of me, when in reality, I can look back at my life experience resume and see all these times where I have excelled in life, where I have survived and thrived, and I'm letting some person who has an opinion and a chip on their shoulder determine my future and what I'm capable of? I don't think so. No longer am I letting people tell me who I am. And I'm no longer am I ignoring who they are because I feel bad. I don't feel bad. See, when I feel bad, it sounds like a sheep. You know, when I feel bad, that's sheep energy. That's not lone wolf. That's not protector. You're meant to protect yourself. You know, you can't keep throwing yourself in these situations that are toxic and emotionally abusive and think that that's gonna, you know, you're gonna win there. You have to take yourself out of it. It's your job. It's your job to do that. God gives guidance. He doesn't tell you what to do. He'll show you how you can learn how to do things, but he's not gonna do it for you. He's not. Lottery tickets aren't gonna get you out of this, you know. Passive is not going to get you out of this. You need to make, you know, you're an investment, a calculated risk. You need to make some decisions and say, like, I need to choose better. And it's like, if you ask why you're settling with certain situations, you're going to feel, as soon as you settle, you're going to feel it. Because you're going to, when I recognize I'm settling, I will be like, if I had my money, and if I was in shape and I felt good about myself, if I had my life in line, would I settle for this person? Would I choose this person? And the answer is no. That's the answer. And so a lot of people will put like, oh, love yourself unconditionally. Well, if you're eating junk food and you're making bad decisions, that's not loving yourself. So to pretend that you're loving yourself unconditionally is a lie. That's a lie. So when you're lying to yourself, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel that. Okay? So, and you're going to get, that's where if you're not doing, I got to pay attention to this. Sometimes there's times where I know where I'm rushing myself and I need to give myself time to learn, but there's also times where I know I'm being delusional. And I feel like that's sometimes where the anxiety comes and I'm just like, I know I'm tricking myself and I'm not actually prepared and I need to get more prepared. And there's times where I'm just like, I don't know enough in order to get that ball running. And like both are being honest and realistic with the situation and not delusional. You know, like, do I want to go back to the 9 to 5? No, I do not. But do I have a channel that is paying my bills? No, I do not. I'm not willing to sell my body or make low vibe. That to me, doing the OnlyFans, women are so much more valuable, and so people say no judgment. No, you deserve better. You are so much more capable of more. So that's why I would never do that. I've never worked in a strip club. I've never sold my body for money, and except in a factory, right? So it's just a different way of doing it. But it's like we all got to recognize like we have value, and so it's not judgment. It's just recognizing like I don't like when people say, "Well, you got to do what you got to do." I understand that, but I think there are levels to where, I don't know, there's just such, your body is such like a shrine. And while I understand it's very similar into like where I'm exploiting myself in a factory, it's just like, I don't know, to me it's always felt different. I feel different when I give myself to a man sexually and I realize that he was never in it for the same reasons as I was. That hits, that makes me feel different than if I give myself to a boss at work. Because in the workplace I feel like I'm learning, and while I'm still learning, I guess, in that other sexual experience, I don't know, there's something different about it for me, and I could be wrong. That's just how I'm seeing it right now. And it just triggers me when I see women just giving themselves for it's just so, I don't know, I think it's just such an intimate, like your energy is too, right? So like I could be wrong with that. I definitely could be wrong with that. They could be very similar. I guess it just feel like one is more naive and vulnerable than the workplace one, if that makes sense. It's just there's an innocence attached to, and like a vulnerability, but it's also like an intimate. It's intimate to me. Like when I don't want to give myself to a number of people. I just want my one person, and I want to share my body with that one person. I don't want to give myself to everybody else to make money. I don't know. I'm now I'm getting a little off topic, so I think I'm going to end this message here. If that's a conversation someone wants to talk about, you want me to go more into it, I can go more into that, but I don't know why I feel that way. It's just the way I feel. I've never been that person to, I don't know. I don't know if that's like I feel like when you use your body instead of your mind, like I've recognized that I have a mind, and I am smart. I just haven't had people recognize it. So I don't know, like when you use your body, if you're tapping into your full potential, like you have a whole mind there. I don't know. I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to stop there. I hope this is helpful. It's a really long video. I don't know how long it's going to take to upload. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, what this is going to look like, but hopefully it's helpful. And I will see you in the next one. Whatever that be, a card reading, whatever it be, a short, I'm not really sure. I will see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks for watching. And I appreciate any and all of your support.